So now I'm just putting just a really basic figure here. And a lot of time when people mention anatomy, I noticed that a lot of beginners always think of muscle structure and all that. Anatomy also including proportion. So when you're trying to get the silhouette or when you're trying to draw a figure, first thing that you need to be dead on is proportion. So try to get your proportion right, then all the detail you can fill in later. A lot of time you see a bunch of sometimes you see some drawing that has a lot of detail but the proportion doesn't look right, so a lot of time it looks weird because the proportion is off. And it doesn't matter if you have a lot of detail. If your proportion is off, then it's just gonna throw off the whole drawing. So when you trying to get this, either you start out with drawing. Sometimes I'll start out with drawing if some people request, but a lot of times it's easier for me to start out with just a silhouette. But either way is fine. When you start out with drawing, it's kind of slower because you have to draw everything out first, and then you're gonna have to fill it in with the value anyway. So I prefer starting off with the silhouette and trying to get the proportion right, and then I'll fill in the drawing and the detail afterwards because I want to render the form first. And what I was gonna say was when you're trying to make a character design or anything that have to deal with either human or animal or anything like that, always look for the reference. A good reference will get you a long way. And the reference, I don't mean copy whatever that on the reference. You look at the reference and look at like, okay, how far is your shoulder to the elbow and where is it end up? Usually end up at the end of your rib cage. So you have to find a really good image for proportion or figure, and then you kind of paint or getting your base design or base body using that as a reference point, and then your figure or your proportion will be just fine. So now I'm making a folder and I'm going to move this layer into that folder, and that's going to be the base. And I'm going to make another layer which is normal on top, and I make a copy of the background color, and that will be behind. Usually I separate this layer out because I can use this layer as mask, so I can just hold control and shift on the layer and it will just automatically select the silhouette or the shape that I have. And now I'm just like I kind of have a vague idea of what this character is going to be. She's going to be like some kind of a Mongol warrior, but I'm not sure what kind of weapon I'm going to give it to her yet. And in the beginning I thought like maybe a broadsword or some type of bow and arrow, but then later on I think, well, maybe I should just use the whip or something and give her a more like an assassin look, because you give it her bow, then she probably look like a ranger or something, but but for now she just have a bow. But then in the end I change the pose a little bit and I make it slightly a little more dynamic. But in terms of dynamic, I don't mean like going full launch action pose, because when you do a character design you have to consider people want to see the design of the overall, so you can't really put a lot of stuff in foreshortening. You want the modeler or the 3D guys to be able to see what you're designing, so you don't want to put them into the action pose. You want them to put the character into the pose that are somewhat interesting enough, with a pretty mundane standing, one leg's front with the other leg's back. But if you do it long enough, there's a subtle way to make it look interesting by moving, using the subtlety of the body language, slightly shift of the hip and the shoulder, because those are really important. Like if you can make the figure have a contrapposto, kind of put them in a contrapposto pose, then your figure will look a lot more interesting. Maybe move a leg forward, move the other legs backwards slightly, and maybe one of the arm bending and one of the arm more straight. Then when your elbow bend, part of your arm or the upper arm will have the shadow, and the other part of the arm will receive more light. So you have to if you paint long enough, you will be able to kind of see beforehand of what it will look like in a pose, because you'll be able to make an educated guess of, if you positioning the arm this way, what part of the arm will receive the light and what part of the arm will receive the shadow. So the layer on top, I just create a darker value and adding some clothing and like armor design on top of the body. And the part that I paint earlier, which is just the pure silhouette, it's just going to be the skin. And if you notice on the brightness, it's going pretty low. It's like 18, 14, I can't really see, or 20 something, but it's pretty low end. But if you're on the 8 bits, this should be right around the middle, or it should be about like 40 or 50 or something like that. So this 32 bits is deceiving, so you should not paint in 32 bits. All right, so now I'm kind of like wondering, why is it going all the way? Because I'm just kind of a little confused at this point, right? But I've seen that before from the students, so I kind of like, oh yeah, this kind of makes sense, that when I said the number, to actually get the number down there, and he actually followed the number, and everything becomes super light. Because if you follow the number of the 8 bits, then when you put the actual number of the 8 bits onto the brightness of the 32 bits, it becomes 2 different values, which I will show you in a little bit of how drastically different they are. So now, but right now I'm just focusing on you, because I don't want to kind of figure out, I just want to kind of go through with it and just get the nice design with just the value that I have here. And resizing the brush, I'm just gonna figure out the hairstyle. And now the hair can be used to kind of frame the face if you want certain type of face and stuff. So 2 different value can help framing the face, because the hair usually darker, and sometimes your hair can be, even if you have blonde hair, if you have fair skin, the blonde hair can be slightly darker, or it can go the opposite way, have a lighter hair but a darker skin, then that could also be frame the face. So as you can see now, I'm using the darker value for the hair to frame the face, and the hair that I made is on the same layer as the armor or the costume layer. So now we have a kind of nice base over here. Now I'm going back to the silhouette of the skin. I'm going to change it up a little bit, make it a little more dynamic, and have a little more kind of a one leg is kind of, well, maybe just gonna make her slightly move her leg so that she looks like she's moving around a little bit, just like what you see in the final. So I'm just gonna switch it. It's like if you see one of the legs coming forward, and I'm gonna try to push the other leg going backward, just slight movement, not drastic change in like, it's not gonna be like super duper action pose, just gonna be very subtle. And the more subtle you can make it, the more you can see. So I'm just gonna bend the knee a little bit here, and I'm gonna try to figure out the other legs of what I'm going to do. So at this point, it just minor tweaking, well, not minor, but some tweaking on the position. So now she looked like, she's kind of about to move forward or about to leap, with one leg's kind of bending, the other leg's also gonna bend. And then I'm going to have to use a light to convey the movement. And you can also see the contour line, and that contour line is curving down that I just paint of the leggings. And the other part, the other legs look like it's going back in space because it has the curve up contour line. So now this contour line can also help with the position or the direction of the object that you're painting. So contour line is also important. The direction of the light is also important, and it can help because you use a default light is coming from the top, and whichever part that facing up, it will be lighter. So you can use a light to dictate the direction of the body part that way. All right, so now I'm just gonna make one of the arms coming slightly forward. now I'm still trying to figure out the position of the arm, but I'm thinking I'm just gonna have one her forearm coming slightly forward, or maybe I should go outside. And I just flip the canvas, and when you flip the canvas, you will be able to tell if the proportion is off or not. It's kind of like if you draw traditionally, you can just face it to the mirror. So now one of her forearm is angled or coming forward, and the elbow kind of moving slightly back in space. So it has that, like I said, it's going to be pretty subtle. It's not going to be like super dynamic action pose, but it's dynamic in a subtle way. So now I'm making another layer behind the figure, and I'm just using slightly lighter value than the coating, just like a little bit, because it's kind of further out, so it's going to have to be lighter than the coating in the front, and it would help separating the clothing in the front and the clothing in the back, like especially her leggings. So now I am going to frame the face and maybe refining the shape of her face a little more, adding the hair. So all right, maybe make it a little longer, reshaping the face. So basically at this point, you are trying to, as much as you can, trying to make it as accurate as you can in terms of proportion and the size of the head, and the shape of the face, the shape of the hair, the shape of everything. If you're not comfortable with making the silhouette right off the bat, just draw it first, and when you draw it, you're going to be able to figure out more. Like a lot of time, even if when I start off like this, sometimes there'll be like a small minor stuff that I will keep tweaking, and I will use like either use a green or orange line to draw on top or on a different layer to try to correct the proportion or try to correct whatever I'm trying to. If something is off, like proportion is not right, the position of the arm is not right. So now when I move one of that arm backward, I'm gonna add the bow, but then it's kind of make it look slightly not too natural for me. Then eventually I change it to a whip instead. So now I'm just trying to figure out. A lot of time thinking is pretty hard, and the more you do, the harder it gets in terms of trying to put them in the position that you actually want. And sometimes when you're doing stuff, you kind of like, well, it look exactly the same as I did last time when I posed. So you want to find something that different enough, but not too far out, so that you can still see the whole body, right? So you don't want it to be like, oh, jumping pose, then you don't get to see certain part of the body, because in the character design, you want to be able to see the whole design or the majority of the body part in terms of like, vertically designed. So you want to be able to see them all, if possible. And then you're gonna, like, after this, you're gonna be doing the turnaround, so you better like figure it out, like what she has on her body, like what kind of fabric, what either be fur, leather, and metal, any kind of stuff. So now I am just going to, what am I doing? Flip again. I'm just going to flip the image, and you see like the text is really big because I'm working from the laptop. So if you had my Patreon before, you probably be like, wow, that's a big text, because usually it's pretty small, because I haven't built my laptop yet. I haven't built my desktop yet, but eventually I will in pretty soon, because I just relocate for the hell of it to Bangkok. So I'm gonna stay here for a while, and then I probably move up and down the coast. We'll see. So now I flip it back, and let's see here, what am I going to do? So basically I'm just using only 3 value here, and with just 3 value you can see that I can get it to look interesting enough with it's give you enough information that you kind of be able to tell that, okay, this is what's going to look like in the end. So now what did I just do? So I have 3 layers: coating, skin, which is the base, and then now I'm just gonna fix the proportion of the arm a little bit. So I make a new layer and I put it all the way up on top, and I am going to make a palette basically. So let's just see what color I'm going to use, and the reason I put it on top so that it doesn't get mixed up with the rest. But actually I'm just gonna draw and trying to figure out the way that the whip would come down with her body movement, because I thrust her hips on the right side of the screen, on the left side of the screen a little forward, and then the arm on that left side of the screen is going to go backwards. So shoulder and pelvic always going the opposite way. If the right shoulder is coming forward, the right pelvis usually going backward, and that's just how your body balances itself. So now she's going to carry a small dagger, and then the whip's going to be in the front. So I think I'm going to go with that. And now I have another layer I just made on top of everything, and this one is going to be face. So I'm just going to the window and arrange and open up another window for the same file so that I can see the whole body. And then if I go too dark or too light on the face, and if it doesn't match with the rest of the image, I would know, because right now I'm going to zoom in and trying to get detail on the face. And at this point I'm just kind of going through. I kind of forgot what about those value thingy on the brightness, but eventually I'll fix that and I'll show you how I figured that out. So now I'm just going to use that dark value from the hair, and I'm just going to make some mark on, well, some sort of a shadow area. Usually I'll go for the shadow area on the face first, like the eye socket, bottom of the nose, and then the upper lips and the lower part of the lips. But now I'm just trying to reframe the face and trying to get the facial structure or the frame, the shape of the face to my liking first before I start adding eyes and nose and all that. So usually the level that you would add the eyes in is like, if you think of the whole head, the eyes usually right in the middle vertically. So the height of the head, the eyes will be halfway to the top, and then the distance between the two eyes equal one eye width. Usually it can be slightly wider, slightly shorter, depends. Some people's eyes are closer together, some people's eyes are like a little further apart, so that way. But in general, so it's midway, the height of the head, and the eyes in between the eyes is equal one eye width. So that's the general rules. And if you kind of, and to the bottom of the nose is from the eye level to the bottom of the chin, so that's always halfway from the eye to the chin. And the lips is a little higher, closer to the nose than closer to the chin, because the lip that's a jawline, and jaws depends on how long your chins are. If your chin is pretty big, then the distance between the mouth to the jaw will be larger than the distance between the mouth to the nose. All right, so now I am going to slowly, so now I have the frame of the face, and I'm just gonna slowly reframe it and see. What's important here is that I'm gonna try to get everything to the right location first. Like the shape has to be right before I start adding more in there. So once I get the first shape right, because you don't want to kind of keep changing and keep tweaking, and the less accurate you are, the more mistake you make, and the more you paint, you will run into more problems anyway. So you might as well start off with the solid ground. So your foundation, this is the foundation of the character. You want to get it as accurate as you can. So now I'm on the new layer, and first I just lay down the eye socket, and I want it to be small, and I want it to be slightly smaller and kind of long a little bit. And then the shadow, see, if you measure it, the eye level is halfway from top to the bottom, and the tip of the nose is halfway from the eye to the chin, and the lips or the mouth is closer to the nose. It's about, you can measure halfway, but it's, push it up a little bit so it's closer to the nose, and then you have the jawline, and then you have a bottom lips there. So now this is kind of like a super generic face, and usually I start out the face this way because I've been painting quite a long time. So I try to avoid drawing, because when you draw you have line, and line sometimes can interfere with the way you paint, because sometimes you don't want to destroy your own line or whatever. Some of the students, like, you know, they when you have line and the line doesn't get as accurate as the painting you make. So anyways, so now in here, don't try to add too much detail. What you are trying to do here is trying to get the shape correct, and however the shape of the eyebrows you want it to be, or however the shape of the overall eye shape, and it's about the arrangement of the shape, and each shape has its own value. So try to simplify. I know that the concept of simplify can be hard to understand. It takes me decades to understand the concept of simplify. So just be patient and don't add too many value into a lot of area. Just keep the value in minimum, like 2 to 3 value at first, because later on you're going to be rendering and you're going to be adding more value and you're going to have more transition. But at this point, just treat it as 3 or 4 value. Like here, I only have like 3 to 4 value, and I paint at 100% opacity with all this shape, and I treat all these the eyes, the eyebrows, the nose shape, and the lips, I treat it as shape instead of like trying to render it all the way and trying to make it round up the nose and trying to smooth everything along the way. I try to make it as, you know, as a basic shape first, and then I will make a transition like what I'm doing here a little bit, and you see the value, they aren't that contrast. So try to limit your value in the mid-range, and don't go to contrast too soon, because if you go to contrast right away, then you know you throw everything off. So move everything along at the same pace, so that you know you can kind of be able to tell if something is wrong or not. If you put like the darker value right off the bat, it might work for some people, but from what I've seen over the years, it doesn't work out that well when you have like just one area have like a super contrast, because you need to control the value for this overall character. You don't want to kind of like work on one spot all the way to finish and move to the other spot all the way to finish. It doesn't work that way. You have to move everything along sort of evenly. So now I'm just gonna move the face up a little bit, so I make this and modify it just slightly taller, and then I'm probably gonna move. So like I said, it's the shape of each element on the face, and also the location of each element on the face in relation to each other. So it's not just, you know, it's not just about rendering, it's about accuracy, and it's about how you want the face to actually turns out. And if you haven't painted a lot of face before, I would recommend do a lot of study on different ethnicity type of face, or you know, you can use a reference, and that's totally fine. You don't really need to like copy it, but you can just have something as a reference point, like what we talked about earlier on the, you know, proportion and all that. And face could be the same thing. You could open up the face along the side and try to get reference point from the face that you're using. You can make it like the same likeness or not, but you know, reference points is always good. So usually when I paint a face, I start off with a basically pretty limited value. I try not to go over whatever the existing value that I have in the image, and I will, if I zoom in on the face in particular, then I will open up another window using the window and just go to whatever setup that I have, and then open it up so that I know if I try to increase the contrast, it wouldn't jeopardize the whole value. And now I merge everything down into one layer as the base, and then just gonna be base. And like I said, when you are painting face, the very important thing is basically the placement of each part of the face, like the eyes, the eyebrows, the nose, the lips, the accuracy of the shape is also important. So now I'm just going to flip the canvas and see if it will hold up if I flip. So if your image is accurate or if it's correct, then when you flip or if you're doing upside down, either way, your image will hold up. Like the face will look weird. Like try it. If you draw the face on one direction and if you flip it and if it doesn't hold up, then there's something wrong with the face. So now I'm going to add some thing behind the base, which is going to be part of her skirt, sort of just going to be a ragged probably leather or maybe some fur, I'm not sure yet. But since she's moving kind of like in the swing pendulum motion, because she draw the whip, so she draw the whip to the back with her hand that on the right side of the screen, her leg that are on the right side of the screen moving forward, that will cause the fabric behind her butt to move backwards. So that's kind of like the rule of animation basically. Alright, so now I'm just trying to maybe getting this silhouette to look as accurate as I can, and don't forget to save, always save. Now I'm trying to figure out, since now I'm painting in the 32 bits, I don't have that. I mean, I have a lot of lighter option, but not that much option in terms of the darker value. The darker value is like accumulate in the bottom part of it. So I'm gonna try to figure out to go a little bit darker, but it's like the number just doesn't add up in comparison to 8 bits, like I mentioned earlier. So this is probably the value of the character is probably 40 to 50. But if it's so now trying to figure it out and trying to get the lighter value in some part of it, and I try to move the slider along and it doesn't look like anything that I'm familiar with. So I'm gonna make another layer behind it, and I am going to get the gradient. Usually the top will be darker because usually wherever they're closing to, the part that are closer to the horizon will be lighter. So the horizon I kind of have it around the bottom part of the screen, so it will be lighter there, and the top of the sky will be darker. Now I'm using a layer to tweak this value so that the character would stand out, because sometimes when you're adding just the value on the sky and the value that you have could be too similar to the value of the silhouette or the value of the character that you have. So you're gonna have to kind of tweak it a little bit, so it might be slightly darker or slightly lighter. But you won't have that problem in color, because most likely the color of the sky will be blue or purple or slightly bluish red, and most of the time your character, the color of your character will be different, so you won't have any of this similar problem. But when you paint in black and white or paint in grayscale or monochromatic, you will have to segment your value properly so that you will have, so visually it will look more appealing, and visually it will be better read, or readability is really important. So you want your character to stand out from the background, and try to avoid making a lot of make the background too busy in terms of character design. But if you're just sketching, by all means, do whatever you want with background. You can have a bunch of pattern or scribble in the background. Sometimes look fancy that way. But in terms of like if you're going to design a character, the focus should be on the character, not necessarily the background. So now I'm trying to add, maybe she's like holding some sword behind her, but then later on I decided to take it out because it might be a little bit too busy, because the couple of weapons that she has should be enough, like the short dagger that she holds and the whip. So now let's see here. Before I start adding detail, I should kind of figure it out, this whole value thingy. Now I'm making another value in front of the base. I call it the base, but it's just basically the character, which is I merge everything down so it becomes just one layer. I'm trying to think what I should do with it. Tone down the opacity on the brush, and this one is multiply, so I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow from the bottom and try to get the overall form. So I'm trying to give this whole thing slightly bit of form, applying a little bit of texture brush and soft brush overall. And I use pretty low opacity, like 30 or 25, 27, doesn't matter. But at this stage, I'm trying to sculpt this thing out, sculpt it, and try to give it a bit more form. So basically, the lighting that you rely on is front 45 degree, and then come and hit. If you look at the spherical that I have on the palette, that's the direction of the lighting, which is front, and then hit the director from the angle on top, a little bit angle, maybe 45 degree front, and adding a little cast shadow on the neck, a little cast shadow on the inside of the arm, and some, as you can see, the shadow will be more on the leg that going backward. So because it's going backward and it's kind of parallel to the light, so it didn't get that much light in comparison to the front leg on top of the knee. I didn't add the shadow on there because the light gonna hit on top of it. So now we add slightly bit of the form shadow with a little bit of cast shadow, and I'm not concerned with the occlusion shadow yet, because occlusion shadow will be the darkest one, and it's going to be where the light is absent. So now I'm going to flip the canvas, and then I'm going to try to take a look at the overall image and see if it holds up. And it's still pretty, like low contrast overall. And I'm going to revert back to 8 bits, and then we'll see if I would have more value range that visible to the eyes to work with. I think the 32 bits, you have a lot of lighter spectrum, and those values are kind of most likely invisible to the eyes. So now I'm just merge everything that character related down to the one layer of the character. Then I'm just going to increase the contrast a little bit using level, just tiny little bit there. So now the form become a little more visible, so the contrast is a little higher. On level, I like to use level rather than contrast, lightness and contrast, because I can have a more precise of how much light I could add in and how much shadow I could add in or take out. So at this stage, I'm just trying to get the overall form. Detail is not of my concern at this point. We will get the chance to do detail in a more elaborate fashion when you apply some more color and everything else. Right now, let's see. Way to tell if your file has 32 bits or 8 bits by looking at the title on top of your canvas, the name of the file, and it will say 32 bits or the 8 bits. And if you have 32 bits, then you are on the wrong side of the spectrum. So now I'm going to change the background into the mid gray, and I think I kind of like the mid gray better than the dark, because the dark. So your artwork, usually if you paint it on the dark background, your artwork will turn out to be darker than usual. And if you paint on the mid background, your artwork will kind of stay in the mid tone more so. And if you paint in the lighter background, your artwork will come out pretty light. So it's kind of like your eyes in relation to whatever you've seen in the back, and you're automatically think that that's the amount of light that you get. So now going back to that again, I'm going to change it back. So this part is not that important, because I'm going to change it to lighter, and don't like it that light. I like the mid ground a little bit better, but this is in 32 bits, so the color might be slightly different than the one in 8 bits. So now we are going to turn into 8 bits pretty soon. Alright, so basically, previously I was trying to find a way to turn this back into the 8 bits, but I couldn't figure out from the interface end. So I'm just gonna do it how I think this would work. So I'm just gonna compare the value of the character there, right? And then you go to the 8 bits. It's like the value is not even the same from 8 bits to the 32 bits. They are far apart. So I'm actually going to drag the character down from the 32 bits. I'm just going to copy the 32 bits character. I'm going to paste it onto the 8 bits file. And then you see a huge difference. Now, when I paste it on, everything become really dark. So that is the actually value that I paint if I were to paint it in the 8 bits. So everything get a lot darker, and that's supposed to be the same value, but see, the brightness didn't move when I use a color picker. So that means the 32 bits is, the value is not the way that you should be painting. So 32 bits is not for production art value. So if you want to paint, stay with the 8 bits. So I think that should clear up some of the confusion that you have for 16 bits, 32 bits, 8 bits. Stay within the 8 bits, and your painting, your value will be a lot more accurate. And as you can see here. So now, since I dragged the file into the 8 bits, I'm just gonna turn this file off. The 32 bits, it's a little like too much information that it's not visible to the eyes. And I think it's used for some specific type of production, which if you Google it, you probably find some what kind of production that use 32 bits. But for painting and for digital manipulation or photograph or anything, we usually use the 8 bits. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to start saving this one as the main file using this value, because this value is a lot more comfortable to the eyes, basically. So I'm just going to copy, save it as the file that I want to save, and then I'm probably going to lighten up the value of the character a little bit, and then we're just going to start adding some color. So now just going to move the background and the character into the folder, and that will be the base, and I'm going to turn this background into the empty or blank. So let's pick some gray color or something, and then I'm just going to fill it in. Light gray, mid gray, and it's a little green, so I have to, in comparison to the character is a little warmer, even though the character is gray. But the actual background or the actual sketch that I have that I drag it onto has a little more green in it. So I'm just going to fill in with the gray that I have from the character, and then I'm going to make it slightly lighter. And now I have what I want. And if you look at the top on the name of the file, it said 8 bits in the end. Now I am going to uprest the image a little bit, because I'm going to add some color, and we're gonna we're gonna progress further on the painting. So now everything comes darker, and that's what the value should be on that brightness spectrum for the real 8 bits, right? Now I'm going to save the file as whatever I want to name it. So now I'm just checking the overall value of the character and see if anything went beyond 20, because I don't really like the dark to go beyond 20 unless I have to. So I'm gonna probably light some of the character, the darkness a little bit, lighten it up, and then I'm gonna try to make the background slightly lighter, move it up, pick the color of the background, move it up, and then gonna lighten the whole thing there. And now the character looks really dark. So sometimes, like what I mentioned earlier, if your background is dark, then you can see the character better in the dark. And if your character is light, then so now I'm going to use level and decrease the darkness and increase the light on the character. So on the output, I'm just going to reduce the darkness so it becomes slightly lighter, and then on the light on the input, I'm just going to increase the light. So now it looks a little bit lighter, and now I want the skin to be a little more light. Then I move on the input, I increase the light on that part of it, and I'm just constantly checking the value if that's the number I want, because I want the skin color to be around 50% or 60%. Now I'm adding another layer behind the character, and I'm just going to add some gradient. So the gradient will be darker on top and lighter on the bottom. I'm just going to use multiply. Oops, I need to make the other color lighter, so that one should be really light, the background color. So you have the foreground color in the rectangular shape and the background color. Alright, so now that's the color that I want. It might be a little too dark. I'm probably going to have to tweak the value. So, and always try to make your character value separate out from the background, or make sure that it's the silhouette is readable. Sometimes you see some part that have like a very similar value. As long as it's not the majority of it, it's fine. As long as it's have a clean or clear silhouette that stand out from the background, it's good. So try to achieve that result, and then your character will stand out more. So now I am, what I'm doing here, I'm gonna select this whole thing, make a new layer on top, and use overlay, and I'm gonna using the lighter color from the background and start adding some light onto this character here. I'm gonna change it to brush, and then default, and then pick the lighter color. Actually, I'm just gonna add skin, not the, just gonna add color, not the light. So now I pick the skin color. I'm using overlay, and just gonna start adding the skin color to the character. So I'm gonna start first apply the base color, and then I'm going to render the rest of them. But first I gotta establish the base color of what part of the character will be which color, and then after I figure that out, then I'm gonna start painting in color. Because with the black and white or with the monochromatic grayscale, I usually use that as a starting point. But when you really go into the painting stage, you shouldn't stay on to the monochromatic or grayscale for too long. You should kind of progress after you figure out kind of the basics shape. Then you should make you should paint in color. But if you are not comfortable with color yet, because you don't know whether you go cool or warm, or what part should be lighter or darker, and how dark, how light it should be, just use the general rule. Like usually on the light side of things, the light will be cool or desaturated or blue because of the natural light from the sky. And if the any color get darker, it will be warmer. So you move the saturation to the red or closer to the warmer side of things. But when you are picking the color that are facing the light, you should pick the color or move the saturation to the less saturation. Or less saturation usually go toward the cool, which means the blue would have less saturation than the warm. So the warm color usually have more saturation than the cool color. Alright, so now I'm making another layer, and I'm going to add some kind of icy blue fur, or basically white, but I just want kind of like off-white, but I wanted the fur to be blue, a little more blue. And then for the rest of the fabric on the outfit, I'm probably going to use the brown, or kind of like, I'm trying to make the material look more like leather. So Now make sure that everything in there has, try to pick the color and don't add small splash of color. Try to make big stroke and giving the color area, giving a big enough area for your color, so your color would show. And if you look at a lot of really good painting, you see a big patch of color rather than a small patch. A small patch, of course, after you want to add more detail and add some pattern or something. But in the beginning, you should have a clear idea of which area would be what color. And that's going to make it easier for you to progress further when you start when you're trying to finish the whole painting. If you start off with a tiny little bit of detail right off the bat, it's going to be really hard for you to progress. So get the big shape first and make sure that the color is more consistent. You can make your own palette inside the image, or you can separate your different palette out. The reason you want to make your palette is because if you're painting on the overlay, and if you accidentally pick some of the color, or you pick some of the color and you want to go back to the same color that you picked before, you might lose it. So, but if you make a palette and make 100% opacity and paint that color onto some piece of file or onto your palette, when you go back to pick that color, you get the exact same color back and paint an overlay, and you can paint it on, apply it on overlay, and it will be the exact same color without any mistake or having a different color on that overlay, because overlay doesn't show the same color that you pick exactly. So at this stage, this is basically the result that you want. So you have the three basic or the three base value and slightly bit of form. So you can see a little bit of form, which part of the bodies is where, and then some of the shadow that indicate, okay, what part of the plane that's facing down or facing up. So you can see some of the form around and some of the form has, it has direction, that which part's facing the right and which part is facing away from the light. So it has a little bit of form along with the basic color. Now I am going to use another overlay on top of everything else, new layer. Then I'm going to add some lighting. So it's kind of like 30% gray. So I'm just going to add a little bit of light onto the fur and light onto some part of the chest, or I'm trying to detect the plane that are facing slightly up or directly up. So the knee, that part is facing up, so it's going to be light, and part of the forearm that's coming forward, and the top part of it facing up or facing toward the light, so it's going to be a little bit lighter. So just add a little bit of light. I can hardly see it, maybe I should. And at this point, I'm trying to paint it in terms of, imagine a character in overcast, so everything is in the mid-range, nothing is too contrast yet. In the end, I'm going to add a stronger lighting so that I can pick and choose whichever part I want it to be lit. And sometimes you can play with the lighting direction, make the lighting come from the direction. When you have the uniform lighting in the kind of like very low or very limited light source, because everything is in the mid-tone. When you're applying the light, then you have more advantage of you are able to choose the direction of the lighting or play with the light more in the final. But now I'm trying not to make everything going over 80 or 70, so everything is around 30% or 70 or 80% in that range. But the skin, since she has like a fairer skin, so the skin will be kind of lighter, but it's still not as light as if it were in the direct sunlight. So it just kind of light in the mid-tone, mid-tone in terms of lighting, but Now I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow. At this part, just going to be refining the form and try to clean up some of the scruffiness of the line work and all that. So I'm going to clean this up and make sure that now if your proportion is correct, now is the time to correct the shape of the the upper arm, which is the shape of the deltoid, shape of the bicep, shape of the forearm. Yeah, but you don't have to go all out with all the detail, especially when you paint a female. You don't want it to be too muscular unless you're painting a She-Hulk. Now I'm just cleaning up and using eraser to erase the silhouette. I'm just painting on this base because I merged everything down to one layer and trying to make sure that everything has a nice and clean shape, especially on the skin area. On the fabric area, usually I like to play with the texture brush to kind of giving it some, it could be called style, or it could be, you know, some sort of material, because some texture can give the audience a better idea of what type of texture she's wearing. Like, is it like a rougher kind of fabric, or is it a smoother kind of fabric, right? Is it silk, or is it leather, or is it different type of fabric? So all that texture brush can really help. But rendering wise, you can get away with just default round, hard, and default soft brush. So now I'm cleaning up the arm. As you can see, it's slowly coming into the smoother shape, and I'm just gonna slowly moving throughout the whole image. But I'm just gonna start with the skin, and I'm just gonna try to make it proportionate and make it look as accurate as I can, basically. So just fine detail, not fine detail, but like giving it the form a proper rendering. So now I'm zooming in, and I'm gonna start rendering the area around the face. So we're just gonna give her a cleaner and nicer face. And then I also open up another window. So like I said, when you are zooming in, you should open up another window so you know that whatever you are painting or the value that you use is not overly too dark or too light in comparison to the whole image. And that's why you kind of need to open up another window. Then that would help you. If you go too far, then it will look off as an overall image. Because when you zoom in, it might look fine on the image that you're zooming in, but on the overall image, it, you know, some part it would look weird if you choose the wrong value. So now, like I said in the beginning, I'm gonna clean out the base of the face first and try to get the light and shadow and soften some of the part. But some of the brush stroke I could leave it. And the most important thing at this stage is basically trying to get the right shape for each element of your face. Like the eyes, try to get the right shape for not the eyes, but the right shape of the overall, like maybe the shape of the top eyelash, including the iris, and the shape of the bottom part of the eyelash, and where would the eyelash be, and the shape of the light and shadow. So the shape of the light and shadow is not like you're trying to draw a nose. You're trying to identify what plane what plane and what shape of the plane of that shadow will be to make it look as accurate when you applying the dark and the light. So shape of each object. Don't think of it as like, oh, I'm gonna draw nose, or I'm gonna draw mouth, or I'm gonna draw eyes. Just draw the shape of the shadow, and the shape of the light and the shape of the value that should be there. So it might not look like a nose at all, but when those shapes are combined together, it looks like the part of those polygons or the nose that come off from the face, basically. All right, so now I am trying to make sure that the shape of her overall face or the frame of her face is what I want. So I keep tweaking the part that are surrounding the face, which is the darker value of the hair, to make sure that it frames the face correctly in the direction that I want. And once I have this whole shape of the face correct, then I'm just gonna go in and start painting each part of the face. But now I just want the big, like try to go for the bigger shape first, then narrow it down to the smaller shape, because if you leave the bigger shape as not what you actually want, then the result might not be desirable when you finish it off. So be patient, work your way from the big part to the smaller part. Don't rush it into like, oh, I'm just gonna paint the eyes right away and eyebrows and all that. Try to build it up so that make sure that everything is kind of almost exactly as you want. It can't be super exact, but as close as you want it to be. So now I'm just cleaning up the chest area because I want the area of the collar to be a little lower, and that plane of the chest is going to be slightly flatter, and then it's going to be all the way down. And the neck area would be in the shadow because the plane of the chest is slightly upward, and the neck is kind of vertically, so it's facing you directly. So it's going to be darker than the plane of the chest. And now I'm just adding a little bit lighter value for the area on her breast, and just everything is still, the value is still very close together, so it's not a lot of contrast yet. I'll start applying the contrast onto the part that have occlusion, shadow and all that. So now I'm going back to the face and frame her face a little bit more. So of all these area, which is I spend a lot of time in, is going to be pretty much the focal point, because that's going to be where you're looking at first. Usually people look at the face first if it's not the environment. In the environment, you're doing the composition, and then you're trying to guide the eyes of the viewer to look at the particular setting that you set onto that composition. That's why you make the composition. But for the character design of a figure, you can also lead the eye, but most of the time if you do like female character or even a regular male character, most of the time the audience eye will be drawn onto the face first, then anywhere else. If there are anywhere else, that might be the area of the interest. So now I'm going to start adding some darker value around the cheek area. So to make, because when your face coming past your cheek, the side of your face kind of narrow down. So that area is on both sides of your jaw line. The plane is kind of facing downwards slightly. So it's going to, usually the bottom half of the face will be darker than the midsection of the face or the top part of the face. The forehead will receive more light than the midsection of the face, and then the nose, that part, the plane of the nose that are facing up, will receive more light if the light is coming from the direction that we are doing. So now I'm just going to make a new layer and going to apply some, this is going to be overlay. Going to apply some red onto the midsection of the face a little bit. midsection. Actually, I'm trying to apply the lips, which is kind of like make it pink, darker pink and lighter pink using overlay. Basically a little magenta pink sort of thing, so it's a red, but the red on the other side. And now I'm using more saturated red, and now it's gonna be, I'm trying to make her cheeks a little redder, but then I was not successfully executed. And most of the time, you hardly see people do that because it's pretty hard to execute to make it look right. And I think eventually I take it out and I put the red on around the area of the nose instead. So now I have to lower the opacity a lot more because it doesn't look quite right. I'm just trying to play around with making the cheek a little more flush, or having some reddish area in the midsection. Usually it's easier to go right around the nose than the cheek itself. And also you could add a little bit of red around the corner of the eyes. So on the inside of the eyes you have that corner that you have some pink on it, and you can make it cross over to the skin area around it slightly a little bit. So it's okay to do that. But sometimes it might not work on some facial feature. It might work on some facial feature. So you're gonna have to make a judgment call at this point, because this is it's an imaginary face, so you don't have a reference. If you have a reference or anything like that, then it's gonna make your job a lot easier. When you do, like I mentioned earlier, reference doesn't mean that you have to copy exactly what it looks like to reference. The copy usually called study. If you're using reference, it's kind of like a reference point of where you kind of referring back to the reference. Look at it, it's like, are my face looking normal, or are my face looking as good as that one, or am I putting the eyes and the nose and the lip on the right spot? Basically something like that. And when you use reference enough, or when you paint a lot of face, do a lot of study on the face, then you will be able to just come up with your own type of face. So now I'm just gonna borrow the value from the hair. I'm making another layer. On this layer is normal, so I'm just gonna paint normally using 100% opacity. On the overlay, I usually use 50% to 70% on overlay, but if I paint it on the normal layer, I'll use 100% opacity. So now I'll have the part of the eyebrows, or the head of the eyebrows, become darker, and as it go outward, it gets slightly lighter. And as you can see, it's get lighter when it past that. You see the red hue underneath the eyebrow, so that's kind of match the shadow. So it's a little bit intentional. And now I'm going to use kind of similar value for the eyelash, I think. We'll see. And I'm moving. So now I'm going back to the layer underneath those eyebrows, and I'm trying to clean up the base area of the skin on the face a little bit more. Then I'm just gonna go back up top layer, and then just gonna start tweaking the shape of the eyebrows using the existing value that I have there. Then, so at this point, basically I'm just trying to get the shape to look how I want it to look, like the shape of the eyebrows, how much you want it to arc up, or how much you want it to arc down. Or if you want your eyebrows to be a little bit more straight, then by all means go do that. And it's all about the shape of the object that you're painting, and the transition between the value within the shape, which if it's too much, you can make it flat value, but your shape got to be accurate. And the placement of each element on the face along with the shape. If you have the right shape but the placement is not as accurate, and distance between the shapes is not as good, then your face might not end up to be what you are looking for, or what you want it to be. Alright, I didn't mean to rotate the canvas. Usually I don't rotate them as much. I would if I need it, but most of the time I don't need it. I just kind of move my arm, work around the Wacom tablet instead. So now I'm trying to give her the eyelash. And the shape of the eyelash, at this point I'm making it really thin, and the value, I gotta make sure it's not too dark. So you gotta keep looking back onto the full body and see if those dark values stand out a little too much. If it's doesn't look like it stand out too much, then it's fine, your value is fine. And if you look at it, it's not too contrast yet, you can increase the contrast little by little, keep pushing it little by little. Don't go too far yet, because you can go and make it super contrast if you have a good idea of how you want to deal with light and shadow. But if not, then kind of slowly expanding from the mid-tone to the light and the dark. That would be a safer bet. So now this is the shape that I want for her eyes. So, and then I kind of slowly manipulating the shape around it, and I'm not in a hurry to give her the lower eyelash yet, because on the bottom part of the eyelid you don't usually see the eyelash, except on the tail part of it you might see a little bit of eyelash, not usually not in the middle or the head of the eye. So usually on the further end or the outer end of the eyelash. But now I'm painting the shadow of the lower eyelid. It usually have that shadow. You look at a person, you see that because the lower eyelid kind of facing down a little bit. Depends on how protruding your eyelid coming out. If your eye socket is shallow, then most likely you're going to have a little bit more of that skin lower eyelid area that casts a shadow, but they're not going to be as dark. They're going to be slightly darker than the face, than the front part of the face or the cheek that the plane is facing out. But don't make them too dark or too big, because then the person will look older. It will look like wrinkle or something, right? And now I'm gonna work my way toward the nose, around the nose bridge area, which in this case I don't intend to make her have a higher nose bridge, because I want her to kind of look like a classic Mongolian kind of girl or something. So she's gonna have more like a East Asian feature rather than any of the Western counterpart. So now I'm adding a nostril, slightly a little bit, slowly, and trying to manipulate the shape. So her nostril, now it doesn't look like the way I want it, but I will keep tweaking it and trying to make it onto the right angle, and keep tweaking the shape until I get what I want. So it's about the shape, like I said. So now I'm making it slightly smaller on the nostril, and then like I mentioned earlier, like around the tip of your nose you have more area to play with the plane, because the plane change abruptly from the side of your nostril to the front of the face. But then on the midsection of your nose, those are usually a smoother line, or the area doesn't have that much of the plane changing, so it will be smoother, so you can just leave that out for a bit. So the surface around the bottom of the nose will be darker than the rest of the nose, and then the side of the nose, like the skin around your nostril, will be slightly darker too. But the bottom part of it has the face that's facing down will be darker than any part of the nose. Now I'm trying to create a little bit of the nose bridge on the side, and maybe I'll build a cheekbone. And at this point, the value that I use are still very limited and have very low contrast, because I wanted to have like a softer feature rather than angular feature. So everything's kind of round and soft, and then maybe has a little bit of the nose, a little bit of the lips, and a little bit of eyebrows and all that. So I wanted to have like a more smoother surface area. And I'm adding a little bit of the shadow on around her jawline, and tone down the area of the front of the face a little. So it's very subtle. So the value here are very close, but you can see a bit of, you know, how the form is rounding out to the face, like from the front, going slightly to the side, and coming down toward the jawline. All right, guys. Here's like a little bit over an hour, and time is running out for me. So I hope you learn a lot from this tutorial. And like I said, the rest of this is just gonna be a process, and I'll usually try to give as much information as I want. And thank you all you guys that are on Patreon that been supporting me over the years, and thank you for those of you who got this on Gumroad also. Because of you guys, that's why I'm able to make this type of tutorial and try to make myself better, and also try to get you guys or make you guys become a better artist if you really pay attention to what I'm saying, which most of the time is nonsense, but I mean there are some valuable stuff that you can pick up. Alright guys, thank you very much for all your support again. Alright guys, enjoy the rest of the process, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye bye.